Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step out the door and deliver an episode to you while I walk around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It's a pleasant day here in suburban Chicago. The sky is sort of very lightly overcast. It doesn't seem to be in danger of raining on me anytime soon, but it could rain today for certain. I'm a little later walking around to do my walk than I normally am. I usually go between 7 and 8 in the morning, sometimes 8:30. It's almost 11 right now, which is, like I said, a little later than I usually like to do it, but a combination of needing to charge my recording phone and not being sure what I want to talk about gave me a bit of a time delay today. I did, however, come up with something to talk about, and so I thought I would. One of the things I do occasionally on this episode is I will do a message from the deep episode, which is meant to be kind of a deep dive review of a game. And generally the idea is that it is a game that I've played many times and I'm thoroughly familiar with. So I thought today, I was looking around and figured out there's a game I have talked about many, many times here on the podcast. And as far as I can tell, I've never done a deep dive review of it. I did a search for this game. I would think that if there's an episode that just has the title of this game or has the title of this game in the podcast title, that I would find that near the top, and I did not. I went through several pages of episodes because that's how many times I've talked about this game on the podcast. So I hope this won't be too repetitive because this is a game I've covered a lot, but I've never actually done a straight up, full, focused, deep dive review on it. So that's what I'm doing today. Now, I haven't said the game yet. If you have in your head a thought about which game you think I'm probably talking about, take a moment and note that. And then go over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and post that game there or send me a message about it if it's something you'd like to hear about. Because I'd be interested to know, what game do you think I talk about all the time that I've never actually, done a full review of? It'd be interesting to know. Unless your answer is Anachrony, which is the game I'm going to talk about today. So Anachrony is a game that came out in, I think, 2016, maybe 2017. It's 2017. It was designed by David Turksey and then Richard Amon and Victor Peter, the two sort of founding designers behind Mind Clash games, helped develop it enough that they are also credited as designers on the game. David Turksey designed the solo mode himself. The artists are Vilo Farkas, Laszlo Fejes, Laszlo Forgak, Marton Giula-Kis, and Peter Mezzesleni. So I apologize if they are wrong. They probably are. Nonetheless, Mind Clash games came out. Anachrony came out in 2017. I was a Kickstarter subscriber, or Kickstarter backer to the original edition, and I also backed the super expansion mega box thing that they did as well. And so I thought I would do a message from the deep episode about Anachrony. 4 things I like about Anachrony. If you're unfamiliar with it, Anachrony is a worker placement economic game with a heavy theme. The idea is that in the future, the Earth has dissembled into a difficult place to live, and so different communities of people live in these. There's a mega capital city, and then there's all these outposts that people have built, and moving between them is difficult. People tend to use these mechanized exosuits to get around when you're outside of the protected cities. At one point there's an explosion and it damages stuff all around the world, and after the explosion people find that there's a new mineral on Earth that has to do with time travel. It has special properties and it allows us to build time travel machines. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the reason that that material appears is that a giant asteroid hits Earth generations in the future, and the material, because it's time travel related, splashes back through time and causes damage throughout the generations before. So the game begins with this damage having been done by this explosion in the future. And so we know we need to prepare for the coming apocalypse by building up our remote societies away from where the capital city is, because the capital city is going to get destroyed during this post-apocalypse. So the idea of the game is that you are trying to build up your civilization, your society, to be the dominant or best society in the post-apocalyptic world, and hope that yours wins out. The game takes a fairly long amount of time to play on the table, generally between 2.5 and 4 hours in my experience, depending how many players you have. It is a big, beefy Euro game. It's not quite as dense as some of the other Mind Clash games. I feel like Anachrony is more intense in terms of gameplay. I think Septima is about the same. It plays very differently, but it has about the same level of sort of depth of thinking and strategy to it. I think Cerebria is actually less deep, but harder to learn. And Voidfall, I think, is the heaviest of their game. Well, Voidfall is not quite as heavy as Anachrony. Anachrony is very tense as you're playing it. But Anachrony is probably my favorite Mind Clash game, which is why I've played it. I checked, I've logged 31 plays of it, including Board Game Arena plays, which is the vast majority. I probably have 8 to 10 plays on the table. Maybe, that's probably ambitious. I probably have 6 to 8 on the table because it takes a long time to play. So why do I like it so much? Here are 4 things. First off, the game has different worker types. I really like this mechanism. So in the game, you get these little chits that represent the workers in your civilization, and they come in 4 types. There's engineers, scientists, managers, and geniuses. And the geniuses can do the roles of any of the other workers. So you can use a genius in place of a manager, a scientist, or an engineer if you want. Now, at the beginning of the game, you get a few of these, and as the game goes along, you get more and more of them. You can end up with a whole ton of them if you have the right combination of things that allows you to get them. The game comes with enough chits to allow you to have a ton. Now, the game also, because of these different worker types, it has a couple different uses for them. One, in the big city, where the main worker action spots are, different workers are good at different things. So like if you're gonna go excavating minerals with your exosuit, the engineers come back from that fully ready to work again. They enjoy that. Similarly, if you're building things, engineers get you a discount because they're better at building stuff. By contrast, scientists are the only ones who can do the science research, and they also get you more efficient water reclamation if you go to do the water reclamation action with the scientist. The scientists are also bad at recruiting people. They don't have people skills, so you can't use a scientist to recruit new workers. The managers are very good at recruiting workers, and you need to use a manager or a genius to recruit a genius. The regular engineer, an engineer can't recruit a genius. So there's this interesting blend of different workers are good for different things on the main board. As the game goes along, you're also building action spaces on your personal board that you can use, and a lot of those have restrictions about which worker can go where as well. On top of that, the game has this mechanism of the workers getting tired. When you use a worker, they become exhausted, and when they come back to your board, they go to the exhausted side of your board. And then you have to either spend water, which is sort of one of the main currencies in the game. You have to spend water to unexhaust them, to wake them up, or you can force them to wake up, but then their morale goes down. And it's really clever. The morale is tied to end game points, but also like if you use the morale option too often, then you actually will start killing your workers. Once you've used it, I think 3 or 4 times without ever using the pay water to increase the value, then the next time that you use the reduce morale option, the workers literally one of the workers just dies. It's pretty funny. So, while there are other games I've played that have different worker types, it's not very common. It's a pretty unusual type of thing. Everdell with the Pearlbrook expansion has the frog worker that can go to different spaces. And I know that there's this game Oak where you can upgrade the workers into different types. Actually, Dwellings of Eldervale also has this idea of different types of workers, but a lot of them you can get one of a particular type. I'd be interested to know, are there other games that have different types of workers that can do different things and that you get and manage in different ways? Because I think that's just a really neat aspect of the game. All right, the second thing I like about the game is the way that the mechanism and the plot of the game interconnect. I think the best demonstration of this is the loan mechanism. In the game, you can get loans and you have to pay them back. But the way the game works is you get the loan by borrowing it from yourself in the future. So you, at the beginning of each round, you can basically ask for 2 things as loans. And it could be water, it could be resources, it could even be people. And then they show up. And the idea is that we know that things are better in the future. And so the future needs to help the past. And so you're sending back resources so that the past can survive. But then you have to actually do that later. Not only is that a fun gimmick, a fun way to have a loan be interesting, but it also allows for some really funny elements like the bootstrap paradox, where you ask for an engineer and an engineer shows up, and then later when you have to pay back an engineer, you can send back that same engineer, which begs the question, where did that engineer ever come from? It's pretty dumb, but kind of fun too. And that's an example of the way that this game uses a lot of amusing mechanisms that seem to tell an emergent story. Another one I know I've mentioned on the podcast in the past, but I particularly find enjoyable, is one of the leaders is able to recruit people very easily. And so every round they can recruit a person to join the thing. But then you also can get a thing where every round you put a person into a machine and you get a bunch of water out, and then that person dies. And so the dark view of it is you're recruiting people and then tossing them right in the renderer to provide food for or water for your civilization. It's pretty dark, but kind of funny. And the way that the story of the game works is that all of these civilizations, it's sort of like the Dune movie. The civilizations we're seeing, the people we're seeing, are depicted as great or noble, but in fact, when you sort of look at what they're doing, they're all horrible. And the sort of horror of these different civilizations is pretty compelling as a narrative decision or device. So the way that the mechanisms and plot intertwine in the game is very compelling and makes it a lot of fun. As I think about other games that do this really well, this is one of the places where I don't often find that emergent narrative appears in games all that well. I think Tricarion does it really well. I think stuff like Boon Lake, we see that pretty well. Mosaic does that well. Through the Ages does it very well. Where the different plays that you're making, while tactical and strategic, they also create a narrative around what is your society like, what's it trying to do. And I think Anachrony is top-notch in the way that it does that. The only big miss, I think, is that the little tiles for the different buildings are not named. I think that they should be named to give a little bit more flavor. They would give a little more insight into what is it that this place is supposed to be. Other than that, top-notch. I have considered, they do have on Board Game Geek, people have come up with a list of what those tiles are. I have considered printing those out and attaching them to my tiles, but I'm not sure I'd be able to do it neatly enough to make myself happy with the way it looks. I still may do it at some point. So that's mechanism and plot combined for compelling theme. Next step, the next thing I really like about Anachrony, the game has variable goals and variable powers. Now there are a lot of games that have this. This is not unique to Anachrony, but I think it does a really good job of maintaining a very approachable core game while also having the game be shaped dramatically by these elements. So when you're playing, the game has double-sided faction boards. So when you take one of the 4 factions, you pick side A or side B, and that gives you a faction power. And then there are 2 leaders, and you get to pick one of the leaders to use, and that leader also gives you a power. So each leader has their own power, and each faction has its own power. So those 2 things combined give you a significant level of individuation about what's going to happen with your game. And they often give you a direction to go in terms of trying to decide what to do with your turns and how you want to focus. Then on top of it, there are these endgame scoring cards. There are 5 of them, and actually there's like a deck of 10, and 5 of them will be in play each game. And at the end of the game, you evaluate those 5 and you score points based on that. And the combination of those cards and those individual powers lead you to significant variance in what you're trying to do. They also have the scoring condition that you take when you evacuate. One of the things I haven't talked about yet is, like I said, there's a big cataclysm. It happens in between rounds 4 and 5, and the game can go up to 7 rounds, but as few as 5. I don't think I've ever played a game where it only went 5. I've definitely played games where it went 6. Often the games go 7, because the way it works is when there's a cataclysm, then there's 9 worker placement spots on the main board, and once all 9 of those spots have been used at once each, at least, then the game ends that round. So you could have, if like no one goes to that 9th spot, the game could go 3 more rounds. But the idea is that at some point you send an expedition to the city and you evacuate as many people as you can from the main capital city. And you do that by meeting a minimum, you have to meet a condition that you do, and then you get to evacuate people based on some other thing. So for example, one thing that might happen, it could be that you have to have all 3 of your water facilities built, and then you get to evacuate one person, or you get points for every combination of gold, cube, and genius that you have in your thing. So the more geniuses and gold cubes you have, the more points you get. And generally these are 15 to 20 points, so it could be as much as, 20% of your score. It's not uncommon to get 100, just over 100 points in the game. That's a high score though. You're probably in the 80 range, so if you got 15 to 20 points, that's a big chunk of your final score. And a lot of that comes down to thinking about how you want to play those different elements to get off each other in order to focus what you're doing for the game. So that's variable goals and powers. Another way to think of this is as you're building the little buildings or doing other things, you're increasing minor efficiencies in your game. And I think that's a really neat aspect to Anachrony. Now this is something that a lot of complicated Euros do. Of course, something like Great Western Trail does this really well. Revive is a recent game that I think is all about building up minor efficiencies into major efficiencies and winning because you exploited them better than other people exploited their minor or major efficiencies. Underwater Cities is another one that does that really well. So minor and major efficiencies and individual player powers that give you a minor advantage, I really like. And Anachrony does that brilliantly. Finally, Anachrony has an amazing table presence. Now, I think that the art and design in Anachrony is top-notch. Mindclash is one of the best companies, as far as I'm concerned, for iconography, gameplay flow, helping people understand how the game works by what's on the table. The art and design in Anachrony is also top-notch. I think the way that the game looks is really cool. I think the art is pretty good. In the first edition, the people were drawn they weren't the best character illustrations, but the revised ones that they issued with the expansion are really good, and with the updated edition of the game, that's top-notch. But the thing that knocks the game out of the park are the exosuit minis. So in the game, you have these exosuits, which are they're sort of worker vehicles that allow you to send workers to the main capital to do actions there. You can use all the actions you want that you have space for on your player board, but the actions that you put in the city, you have to send these exosuits to. In the retail copy of the game, you get a large hex token that represents an exosuit, and you just put your worker on top of that and sort of move the stack onto the game. The deluxe set, or the minis set, you get a very tall miniature that has a slot in the top, and you put your worker in the slot. It feels dumb, but it actually is really effective as a gameplay method. I think it's really fun. They look amazing. The minis are really well made, and they sort of represent the characteristic of the society really well, and it makes the game just really pop on the table. So thus the table presence of Anachrony is the fourth thing I really, really like about it. There are, of course, lots of games that have great table presence. I'll point to Return to Dark Tower. It's very compelling with its gigantic tower in the middle. I will say there are a couple other games that have really compelling table presence. I like the big double layer tiles or double layer player boards in Revive. I think those look really neat as well. And then I'm going to point to the game Villagers as having a very beautiful style, as another game that's got a really compelling table presence, even though that one does not have any minis and isn't big. It's small but beautiful. So those are the four things that I like about the game Anachrony. So if you've played Anachrony, what do you like about it? If you haven't played it, you should try it. It's over on Board Game Arena. I'd be happy to play an asynchronous game of it with you. My username over there is Wombat929. My username on BoardGameGeek is also Wombat929. Feel free to send me a message there if you'd like. Well, that's about it for me today. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.